Hi there. So today I want to talk about the Dalai Lama and his recent comments regarding the situation with refugees in Europe. He made these comments while in Sweden doing a lecture. And his comments in brief were that Europe belongs to Europeans and that refugees, while we should help them and give them education and help them get on their feet, it should always be with the pretense that they will be going home to rebuild their own nations at some point in the future. This was a really powerful statement for me, and I don't know why I was at first a little shocked that it was him that was saying this. Maybe it just I was just so delighted to hear him say that, because for me personally, sometimes I feel self-doubt in my beliefs, and if what I'm saying is coming from a place of truth or compassion, or if I'm being cold, or if I'm if I don't know, as I've aged I've become less empathetic. I sometimes think about those things, and to hear the Dalai Lama confirm for me what my beliefs are regarding the refugee situation in Europe, and to confirm a nationalistic sentiment, which is that Europe is for the Europeans, or Germany is for the Germans, France is for the French, Tibet is for the Tibetans. This kind of concept, it makes me feel like I'm very much on the right path, that I haven't strayed, that while it takes some nuance, I think, to really grasp why this is ultimately a compassionate position to take, it is ultimately compassionate. And there's a few reasons for that. I think the first reason why nationalism and this kind of a stance regarding refugees and the current refugee situation in Europe would make sense to a Buddhist is because the very first rule of, oh God, sirens, sorry, I live downtown in a city and there's always sirens. Let's wait for them to finish. Okay, there might be more sirens. I'm really sorry. So one of the first rules of Buddhism is that life is suffering, and I know that's a loose translation. The translation of the word, I believe it's dukkha, is you can see it in a bunch of different ways: craving, the thirsting, the desiring for things, the attachment. But ultimately, what that sort of striving for that is a part of our human condition, what that results in oftentimes is suffering. And that's related to the inner world, but I think in a larger context, what this very first rule of Buddhism teaches us is that no one escapes hardship in life, and that it's a necessary, even rite of passage of being a human being, the opportunity to overcome, the opportunity to have redemption, to triumph over the struggles which are handed over to you in life. And no one escapes that. It catches up to everyone eventually. And so I think for someone who is of the more left-wing bent, who believes in a utopian society where all life's needs and wants are met, and we all live in peaceful harmony, and there are no problems, and we have this perfect kind of utopian multicultural society that a lot of leftists, I think, believe they are striving towards. This comes as a very it's an unrealistic and undesirable thing to be striving towards. Not only because there is, I think, a very intense amount of arrogance that comes with the belief that we could create a utopian type of society that, you know, where suffering and hardship doesn't exist. But also that it is the nature of reality that sometimes to be compassionate, we have to tell hard truths. We have to give tough love. We have to be cruel to be kind, as they say. And in this situation, you know, having refugees come into your country, putting them on the dole, having all of their needs, just sort of having money thrown at all of the things that are their problems, and then having them, you know, be hooked on the dependency of the state, that is not a kindness. I wouldn't wish a lifetime on the dole against my worst enemy. You know, that's not a life that's worth living even. You know, some people, of course, they have no choice but, you know, live on social assistance because of disabilities or what have you. That's a different context. What I mean is, you know, someone who can't integrate, won't integrate, and is given no incentive to integrate into a society because their government basically satisfies all of their financial needs on the taxpayer's dime. That is not a good situation for the host or for the guest. The other problem with this is that, which I think the Dalai Lama kind of alluded to with the whole Europe belongs to the Europeans statement, is that there is an acknowledgement of how ferocious Islam can be as an ideology, and there is also an aggressiveness to a lot of these migrants' Islam and the Muslims that are not integrating into their host Western nations. And there is also the aspect of this guest or this new culture which is being imported into Western nations at some point overtaking or overpowering their host culture and the host people. This is not something that's acceptable to someone like the Dalai Lama, because he's experienced on firsthand what an invasion is like. Because of what happened in Tibet with the communist Chinese, the Dalai Lama is very well aware of what happens when the demographics of a country are overpowered by an invading force. Now you might say that it's unfair to call the refugees an invading force, but again, it's the people who are entering a lot of these Western nations on the pretenses of being refugees are not honest. They know that there is an open door policy, they know there's no vetting, and so they are economic migrants. And they do not wish to integrate into Western society. They wish to exploit it in whatever way is necessary while retaining their original culture, which is, it stands in contradiction to Western values. Especially when just one example of that is women's rights. I won't go into that in detail, but the way that young girls are treated with child marriages and FGM in the Muslim diasporas, for example, in the UK, you can easily research this, are horrifying. And anybody who thinks that that is compatible with the West or Western values is delusional. The other thing I think that informs the Dalai Lama's opinion on this is the fact that he himself is a refugee, and that while many other nations have opened their arms to him and offered him a safe place of refuge, and he pretty much would have had his choice of countries to live in, I don't think there's any country that he would rather be in other than Tibet, because he understands that his role as the Dalai Lama, as an individual, is most authentically fulfilled in his nation of origin, amongst his own people, within his own culture. And we all that's applicable to everyone. I really think that Tibet for the Tibetans, which is something that I would have worn on Free Tibet. I would have worn that on a t-shirt as a young leftist. That is a nationalist sentiment, and it is ultimately compassionate to acknowledge that people desire to be amongst their own. And that is not a rejection of the other. That is not a prejudice, like something that derives from prejudice. It is not something that is derived from hatred or rejection of other people. It's a survival mechanism. It has to do with safety. It has to do with being able to predict how your neighbors and how the people in your society are going to react to various different stimuli and any like social interaction. It has to do with the continuation of an ancestry, that shouldn't just be here today and tomorrow, but that should be here for generations down the line. And the diverse peoples of Europe, who are diverse in ethnicity, who are diverse in their culture, deserve to have that preserved. Now, say what you will about Canada and America. I mean, I think Canada and America are at a stage now where they are so multicultural that there might not really be any coming back from it. But Europe still is predominantly, there are European populations with distinct cultures. It's not like in most places in Canada or in the States where you just have, strip malls and big box stores and fast food. And, I'm not trying to be insulting towards North Americans. I am one, but it's different. I think there's more of a consumer culture that exists in North America, whereas in Europe, there are a lot of ancient traditions that, especially in the countryside and in rural areas, are still very much a part of people's lives. And that is being threatened demographically and culturally by a foreign group of people who, hashtag not all, but some absolutely are aggressive towards and don't care to integrate into. So yeah, I mean, I think if you're the kind of person who actually loves diversity, you understand that there needs to be a degree of separation between different types of people. If you have a box of crayons and they're all beautiful colors and you love all the different distinct colors in the crayon box, you want to keep them separate because you know that if you melt them all down into one blob of crayon, you're going to get a big black, gray, nothing color, and you will lose all of that diversity, all of that vibrancy. It doesn't mean we can't interact. It doesn't mean we can't share and trade and enjoy the differences that exist in all of the different cultures and societies of the world. But there has to be strong borders. There has to be an understanding that nation is tied to a people, that culture is tied to a people, that if those people feel threatened by an outside force, they don't deserve to be called names for that. That threat deserves to be acknowledged, and European peoples have every right to stand up against that kind of an invasion and that kind of a replacement, demographic and cultural replacement. And I think that the Dalai Lama really gets that and understands that offering that to Europeans is an act of compassion and an act of kindness to the refugees as well, because I think ultimately the refugees, they're if the actual refugees, they're coming here not out of desire, they're coming here out of necessity, which implies that if things were okay in their home countries, they would prefer to be there. And if given the opportunity to go back and live amongst people of their own kind, who share their values, who share their religion, who understand their way they communicate, and the little idiosyncrasies that, are nonverbal with communication and humor and food and all of these things, to share that with people who are of like mind. I think that it would be crazy to think that they would prefer to live in, you know, little pocket communities within communities where, you know, you don't really actually have that much interaction unless it's conflict. And you know, they'll just always feel like outsiders. I think that it's a greater kindness to give them what they need to go back and build their own civilization and their own societies, which they can feel like they belong to and not feel like an outsider in. That is the greater kindness to me. And yeah, I'm so happy that the Dalai Lama has expressed these sentiments publicly, because it's reminded me why I feel the way that I feel about these things. I think it's easy to get caught up in the kind of horror of some of the things that are happening as a result of these demographic changes. But ultimately, my core positions are what they are because of compassion and kindness, which may on the surface seem, you know, tough or calculated or lacking compassion. But I think with even the slightest bit of nuance and digging, you can see that it's coming from a place of love, ultimately. So yeah, Dalai Lama nationalism now. I'm on board for it. I'm like down with it. This is something that I feel like has energized me and makes me feel strong and like I'm on the right path, and like I have been vindicated or validated in some way, because it is that side of me that's kind of like brutally honest with myself and like, is this really the truth? And what is the true reality of the situation? How is this going to affect things a week from now, a month from now, a year from now, a century from now? All of these things are related to my personal interest in Eastern philosophy, and my previous interest in Buddhism. So it's just, yeah, very cool to hear the Dalai Lama say that. I hope everyone's having a great day. Hope you enjoyed my little ramble here, and talk to you soon. Bye.